tell me, just to begin with, how to pronounce your name.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Hafiz.
Hafiz.
Hafiz, Nauman, Akbar, or Hafiz Akbar.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yeah. And then tell me about the Islamic Center here and the kinds of activities that take place.
So, our Islamic Center is also a non-profit, church-based, religious organization. We were founded in around 1972 or 73, around that time. We started just some activities on campus for like Friday service for the students. Now, currently, our biggest gathering is the Friday gathering, kind of equivalent to a Sunday gathering, where we have a full service, like where there's a sermon taking place. Sermon happens for like 20-25 minutes, and then a short prayer where people stand and bow and prostrate, sort of a personal moment at the end of the sermon. That takes place for about 5-10 minutes. So it happens every Friday. That's the biggest activity. And then other activities are, we're open every day, 7 days a week. Even during the lockdown, thankfully, state did not force religious organizations because of the whole concept of religious freedom and separation of state and church. Thankfully, they allowed, I think, almost all statewide or even nationwide places of worship to be open, but people were not feeling safe. So what happened was our attendance went lower, quite low. Most people were staying home. A lot of our seniors, we have a big population of senior citizens, people who came and started the center in the 60s, people who like local African American Muslims, a lot of people who joined hands together in 60s and 70s to start this place. And then our extended campus on East Side, everybody was just staying home for the most part. So now our attendance is limited, but in normal times, non-COVID times, before and after, we are 5 prayers a day open for all 5 prayers, because Muslims are supposed to do 5 prayers in a day. It may sound a lot, it's a very short prayer. It's not like a Friday prayer service or like a Sunday service that we know. Thank God, it's usually a small one. It's like 5 minutes thing, and it's okay to be prayed anywhere, So people didn't feel so bad for not coming to the mosque during the week. So when the COVID hopefully situation gets, or hopefully we're out of this thing, people will be back for 5 prayers. They still are coming, but the numbers are limited. I would say good 5 people, 10 people in a prayer. And again, even before COVID started, because these 5 daily prayers, first one is at dawn, second one is just after noon, around an hour between 1 and 2. That's second prayer. Third prayer, when sun is declining toward the west, it's late afternoon, late afternoon, depending on the time of the year. So anywhere, it could be from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., depending on where we are. Like in winter, it would be 3, because sunset is already 5. Then fourth prayer, mentioning the sunset, is at the sunset, and the fifth prayer is at night. So these are very personal prayers. Most of them are quiet. There's no loud service. I'm not sermonizing, And of course, they will give them like, okay, we don't have to listen to this guy. But I would sort of chant or sing a chapter from the Quran, at least in 2 or 3 moments out loud. The rest, people would do it for themselves. So they would stand behind the Imam to do that. So that's a very regular 7 days a week activity that takes place throughout the year. Okay. So, yeah. We just completed this year, I think back in February 2020, we completed our 50 years of Friday service. Our first Friday service started exactly 50 years ago in February of 50 years back would be 70, around 70, right? 1970.
Sure. Yeah. Wow.
That was our first Friday service. That happened on campus, actually. That was mostly students. And then people from the local community joined in. So, yeah. Kind of a close-knit community.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit then about your story. How did you, what led you to become an imam, and what was that journey?
Yeah, it's a very, I'll try to keep it brief. It's a very, in fact, if you Google search my name, Hafiz, Akbar, Imam, local NPR, that's, it was about 2 years ago, they did a story on me, how I became an imam. So that would be a longer version of that.
Sure.
I have a very interesting story of becoming an imam, or actually coming toward religion. I am, as you see me sitting, I'm not wearing a hat or a typical clergy, because imam, quote unquote, is equivalent to a pastor, minister, priest, clergy. I'm not wearing any of the symbols because I came from a very different background, sort of a secular background. My calling just happened. It's strange that I actually was studying electrical engineering at Western. Then I went for my associates for a little. I took a break from Western around late 2001, 2002. I started Kalamazoo College, actually. Not Kalamazoo Valley, actually. I'm now at college, but before. Back then it was Kalamazoo Valley, so I went for an associate. Then I came back to Western. This is around the time when it just happened that there were classes that I was taking at Western, and there was a lot of conversation about religion. And people were, so even in like sociology classes, I took sociology 101 at KVCC in a community college. Then I was taking advanced sociology here at Western. In every classroom, somehow Islam is a target. This was my calling, actually, my moment, where I said, sure, if I studied engineering, which I did, but I had a moment like, you know what, somebody has to teach people that why Islam is getting a very weird attention. It's like if, let's say, John Doe commits a crime, the blame goes to John Doe or John Doe's environment or upbringing, whatever. Never a religion of John Doe. But if it's a Muslim, or sadly a person of color, like how the whole movement of Black Lives Matter is going on, our struggle was very similar. Muslims went through very similar pains that all of a sudden, for Muslims, it was also sometimes their race. Like I was always called an Arab. First of all, now I'm an American citizen. My children are born and raised here. Sadly, they also often get associated as being Arab. I have no connection with the Arab world. So even if I did have, how does that define my personality, that I am a bad person or a good person? Or how should that even shape my religion? So I noticed that at college, right here in school, we had professors teaching some very, very bad content about Islam. For instance, the moment that I've not forgotten, that's 17 years ago. In a classroom, a professor was teaching, it's a sociology class, and we had 3 books, textbooks. One was a book of journals, and one of the journals we had to read about Muslims in sociology was saying 70-80% of the Muslims that go to an Islamic center are terrorists. That was very awful. So that was my moment. I said, okay, I'm gonna most likely either fail this course or drop. Something's gonna happen. So I raised my hand. It was a class, big, those, Western had those mega classes where like 100 students were sitting. I raised my hand. I said, Professor, this is wrong. I want to tell you, I go to a mosque, and I'm not a priest or imam or a preacher. I go and pray there. I don't see any bad people there, and I see people of color, actually black, white, yellow, Asian, from every background, right on campus. So he said, see me in the office. I'm like, okay, boy, you're done. Your life is over. It's gonna be a fail, right? So I went to his office, and my God, I'm like, what did you do? I was like, I'm hating myself. Like, why did I have to send him? But it was so bad. Imagine all 100 students are reading that. He said, I want to tell you something, that I did not choose these textbooks. I was like, what? So he said, yes, and I knew something is wrong. There's too much negative information written in there. I said, look, you can visit the center here if you want, and this is bad, wrong information. This is actually basically, we are already, Iraq and Afghanistan were already, facing war, an invasion, right? Which now our politicians are recognizing that was a mistake. Now they're recognizing. Imagine if a student who is joining Marine Corps studies that, he would be one of the first to shoot a bullet at a mosque. And now places of worship are recognized as a place of sanctity, not just by one or two faiths. It's a global, universal consensus. So he said, professor asked me to give a speech, misconceptions about Islam, that things I found in the textbook. He said, me? I said, yes. So see, that was my moment. I said, oh, maybe, I think I can teach. So that's when, even at the center, I started getting involved more. And actually many activities like this one, interaction, getting to know one another, increased. We had professors who used to bring their classes just to show people a mosque, like this is how a mosque looks like, not how it was being portrayed in the media at that time. Media was like literally, when there's a war going on, media has a certain trend. So we were the bad, negative trend. So this was my moment. And that's when a lot of people here, they encouraged me to, not just about teaching others, they said, we want you to teach our community. So it just happened that, and plus I had the qualification. Now, of course, in Islam, it's not what you do, you have to have the qualification to be an imam. So to be an imam, imam is IMAM, clergy, you have to be well-versed in Quran, like somebody would be well-versed in Bible. So now in Quranic commitment means that you have to have Quran committed to your memory also. And that's what a Hafiz is. I'm a Hafiz, in fact, on Islamic affairs and religion, Islamic community affairs, White House had an advisor who was also a Hafiz in the previous presidency, not in this one. Okay. So just to know, let's say you are in the office, let's say you're in the governor's office in the state of Michigan, and you want to make a better decision. Right. You want to deal with the Muslim community. You would want to have somebody by you, someone in the office who could tell you, like, okay, this is what customs are, this would be respectful, this would be not, this is how to approach, things like that. So like now, our governor's office approached us and other churches. We had these sort of spiritual gatherings with the governor's office. They have a spirituality department now, which was much needed back then. See, back in 2003 or 4. But things have evolved into hopefully a better shape. That's why, even in the Black Lives Matter movement, when things turned very bad a few months back, I always tell people that I'm optimistic. This is a beautiful country. This country is worth fighting for. This country is worth living in. This country is worth working for. And I know that our great values of justice and freedom and equality, it will bring us together. This is a moment that I think, this is when I realized that I think I made a right choice for becoming an imam. Now, so Islamic qualifications were there, but I studied those things just as a hobby sort of thing. Like my family sort of led me into that path, even though there was nobody Hafiz in our family, but I just happened in that track. So I went to the Islamic schools, the traditional schools. And, I've mentioned that even when I was applying for a visa to the United States, when I was not a U.S. citizen, I told them that, yes, I went to Islamic traditional schools. And they were like, really? So even at the embassy, like, so did you get some kind of training? I'm like, no, officer, that's not true. So even, so I'm like an open book. I've mentioned everything to, wherever I went, like, okay, yes, this is my background. I'm not ashamed of who I am or anything. I don't care what people say about me. So, but that, I had no idea that would be my pathway to become an imam, because I studied electrical engineering and I also worked for a little while in the IT field. but I had no intentions of pursuing this as a career. And now, actually, since last 6 years or so, I studied comparative religion also. I for graduate studies, religion, just as a comparative religion, and then also I studied spirituality and healthcare at Western. It just happened that I went deeper and deeper in this path, and I studied religions, world religions. In fact, I've taught world religions. I still do teach. Right now, not this year because I'm busy with my doctoral research in the interdisciplinary studies, where I'm studying still religion, academics of religion, and how religion should be taught. It all ties into my experience and everything, that this is what led me to this path. I just did not even plan that I would be studying this particular field that far. So yeah, that's my story in a nutshell. Sorry, it's a long one,
great.
but I have a longer interview with the radio people. They did actually a show where they, I think, did it live or something.
Okay.
So it's on Google.
Interesting.
So
Yeah,
find
I'll
it
look that
there.
up.
Yep.
So, no, that's great.
Sorry.
So for someone who's completely unfamiliar with Islam, explain a little bit, how did Islam begin?
Islam literally means submission to the will of one God. So just by the name, Islam means submission to one God, or accepting God as your guide, as your ultimate source of guidance, inward, outward. It's a monotheistic religion. So that's how I would tell people, like, this is what Islam is. So speaking of monotheism, it must have something to do with Judaism and Christianity. And surprisingly, all three of the communities, including Muslim community today, we trace our roots back to Abraham, lineage-wise and faith-wise both. Meaning, it's like, how Judeo-Christian communities claim to be Abrahamic communities, right? Similarly, Muslims say Abraham's second son, who's also blessed by God in Genesis, and he migrates with his mother Hagar, as God promised that I will bless you and your family and make you into a great nation. So Muslims come from the Ishmaeli nation. The Jews and Christians have the lineage-wise roots from Isaac. So Abraham's two famous sons, right, Isaac and Ishmael. So we are an Ishmaeli nation. Which was promised in Genesis, in Bible. Starting from chapter 12 until 21, being a religion of a man of a comparative religion, this is I've studied actually in quite depth Genesis, and so it's amazing that these are roots of Islam. But now, as it says there, that as God promised in Genesis, that I will bless those who bless your name, which means, which Muslims take it as, that in order to be blessed by God, to be pure monotheistic, you have to follow the message, follow their footsteps, not just a lineage connection, because we're not, quote unquote, nobody is connected like from their father or mother. If you look at our family ancestries, we may go other places, but we're talking a faith connection where it has to come not just in name but also in practice. So that's the root of Islam. And practices, now sources of Islam's guidance, primary fundamental source is the book that came to the teacher of Islam, not a founder. He said, I'm a reviver of the faith. He came among the Ishmaeli people, the Ishmaeli tribes that settled throughout Arabia. Ishmael also has 12 sons, and they spread through Arabia. So all Arabia is actually descendants of Ishmael, all the way to Yemen, the Arabian desert. We're not talking about Palestine. We're talking about actual Arab peninsula. Mm-hmm. So this land, this is where, from the same family, among their descendants, a man named Muhammad, the prophet, was born in the 7th century, late 6th century, early 7th century. And he revived, so Arabia became pagan. So he revived monotheism, Abrahamic monotheism, back to its roots. So exactly as 10 Commandments were speaking, exactly as God spoke to Moses, exactly as God spoke to the prophets of the Bible, and even other nations, wherever God has spoken to people, wherever there is a message of oneness, Prophet Muhammad said, this is a good message to take. They asked him that, "O Prophet of God, so your source of guidance that God gave you is Quran. So this is all understanding Islam." So he said, it's Quran. Quran is a revelation, like Gospel to Jesus or Torah to Moses, peace be upon them, graces of God be upon every one of his chosen people. So they said, what about previous messages? So yes, Quran is your teaching. And then his own wisdom. He was teaching people with Quran and his teachings. It's called Hadith. These are the two fundamental sources of guidance. So they said, what about good things in the previous text? He says, yes, you can take them. In fact, he even forbade people, he said, anything good that you take from the previous books, whatever you take, use it for guidance. Don't try to say it's a lie. Try not to malign or devalue the word. The good word. He said anything good that matches the good works, take it. So Islam has this inclusive approach that even if I'm a Muslim, you heard me mention Bible. Actually, I've mentioned several quotes, sayings from the Bible. For instance, my favorite one is where Jesus said, peace be upon him, Jesus Christ said, a tree is known from its fruit. This is my favorite quote. The whole verse is beautiful. So I quote that in my sermon. So it's perfectly fine. 10 Commandments, Muslims believe in that. So these are some of the sources of guidance in Islam. First is Quran, teachings of Prophet Muhammad. So we know now the roots of Islam, how Islam starts, how it connects with the Abrahamic roots, same as how Judeo-Christian communities associate themselves. Islam did the same thing. Islam actually did not say it's a new religion. In fact, Islam said from Adam to Muhammad, everybody that believes in one God should be called a Muslim. It doesn't have to be a tag that I'm wearing just because I'm from Middle East. I'm not from Middle East, but I'm just saying. By the way, I didn't mention that I was born in Pakistan, Southeast Asia. So it doesn't have to be a tag. So this is a clear message of where the roots are, what the sources of guidance are, what to look for, and then the role models. Look, I can give you a book, but you say, you know what, okay, this is a book. It's like taking a physics book. But how do I know what's my practical? We go to a lab. Our practical lab, is the role models, the heroes of humanity. And they can't be any better heroes than the prophets of God, the chosen ones of God, the good people that we see throughout history, and especially the most honored of them all in the Islamic tradition are prophets of God, messengers, prophets. So Quran, for instance, if let's say I'm studying Quran and Bible both, in Quran you barely would find anything even criticizing the prophet. Okay. Anybody, for instance, Jonah. Sure. Jonah is very famous. He was swallowed by the whale. In Bible, it's about 2 pages. Not a very long story, but short. Even kids know it, right? Mm-hmm. In Christian homes, it's taught. But one of the things that may look not so good about Jonah is that he abandoned his people. You know what I mean? Now, it's mentioned in the Quran too, but Prophet Muhammad was so critical about this thing, about the honor of the prophets, honor of these, holy noble men. He said, if anybody says, I meaning Muhammad, I, Muhammad, is better than Jonah, then you're not one of my people. Why? Because he wanted to tell people that these people are the leaders of the humanity. They are good people. They're good examples. They are role models. They may have slipped here and there, but for the most part, their life is a perfect example to look at. And their slipping often is a human trait. We humans, we make and break. We make mistakes, then we get up, we realize, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, let's fix it. That's what differentiates me from being a devil. You know, devil is arrogant. He makes a mistake and he says, oh, so what? See the difference? So that's, in a nutshell, Islam, from its roots to its modern day practicality.
Okay, that's very helpful. I think you covered 3 or 4 of my questions. So
Oh, really?
great.
What were they?
Oh, just asking about how Islam began and the connection to I knew that biblical connection with Abraham, and I wanted to,
Beautiful.
yeah, and about the Quran. So it's great answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm glad. Sorry, I thought I went long, but I hope it's beneficial.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, maybe when you're doing the video, so, you know, as I'm going, so maybe these questions you can
Sure.
do like a pop-up so that people know, like, now I'm in this line, otherwise they may get bored, like, okay, what's going on here? He's going on and on and on.
So, what do you think then distinguishes Islam from, say, Judaism? This Sunday, in fact, I'll be talking about Judaism. I interviewed the Orthodox rabbi here. What are the distinctions? What are the differences?
You know, actually, it's very, very good question, because in terms of, like, let's say food laws, when I give sermons, I have a friend of mine, I've studied Bible with him, comes from Marshall, Michigan. He says, Hafiz, when I listen to your sermon, believe me, it sounds like you're preaching Old Testament. I'm like, really? Then often he would bring me quotes like, okay, look, this is in the Old Testament. So a lot of the dietary laws, you know, Jewish and Muslim communities, they eat kosher and halal. That's a good one to mention to public. I please convey this message that when they see a halal logo, it's not that Muslims are taking over America. It's just like you see on a yogurt box, you see K.
For kosher.
Kosher. Right. It's good. You know, actually we use this in our language. Yeah, it's kosher. You can have it. Like, yeah. It's telling people that it's clean. Kosher stands for cleanliness, and that's exactly what halal was. What Muslims did, though, in halal, there were a lot of relaxations. Same thing happened in the penal laws. So, speaking of day-to-day affairs, in halal versus kosher, halal does not have the restriction that, okay, if this table has milk and meat at the same place, then I can't have it. These are all null and void. Prophet Muhammad said that God has sent me to lift up some of the restrictions, to ease things upon you. Yeah. So some of the laws are easier. For instance, in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, there's a law about if, you know, when women are going through their periods, the cycles, you know, monthly menstruations. It says if she cooks the food, you can't have that food. You can't have that. If you have it, you're unclean for 7 days. If she sat on the chair during her menstruation, you sat on it, you would be unclean for 7 days. There's a lot of those things that even, I'm sure, rabbis had to interpret, especially on the liberal side. Islam, there was no need for an imam to change. See, in Islam, the book is the authority. Kind of the same philosophy that the Protestant world had toward the Catholic side, like, okay, book is authority, not the man. So Quran would always have that primary authority. So I can't simply just come up and say, oh, this is obsolete. No, the authority, Quran, and the teacher of the Quran, Muhammad, the prophet, not a priest, had to come up and relax those things, or else we would also follow that, you know. So he said, you don't have to do that anymore. In fact, his wife wouldn't let him share food with him. He came and he said, no, I will eat in the same dish, so that people learn that it's okay. When you're in your menstruation, you're not under any restriction that you can't eat in the same dish. He said, there's no blood on the food. You know, he made a sarcastic remark just to sort of drill in people's minds, like, this is changing now. It's changing. So Islam a lot of the rules and guidelines became flex, as opposed to even today in the Jewish community, there's a lot of rules that when I interacted with them, I was surprised that, wow, these are strict rules, even today, in our modern times. With modernity, things change, people reinterpret and all that. So a lot of food rules changed toward the East, but the fundamental remained the same, that since it's God's given food, must say the grace, even at the time of slaughter, not just at the time of food being on the table. That says, if somebody, let's say, forgot, then I can say, it would suffice saying it on the table. So these are some of the basic things. And then some things that people left. For instance, a hard practice of fasting. People don't do it the same way as it was happening in biblical times. Prophet Muhammad came and revived that, but at the same time, instead of having it a 24-hour fast, he said the new law is, from the Quran, that now you're going to do fasting from dawn to sunset. That's it. And even in that, he said if someone is having health issues, including postpartum bleeding time, or recovery time after delivery, pregnancies, travel, menstruations, all of those, men, women exempt, children exempt, people underage exempt. So there were a lot of relaxations, but also there was a principle that we are going to stick to the basic spirit, which is to not have the food and drink so that I feed something to my spirit. Yeah, I'm always feeding something to my physical self, but I need something for my spiritual nourishment. And that's the time when we deny physical and focus only on the spirit. And that spirit will become stronger, then I will care for others more, and then I will protect myself also better from the attractions or distractions of this life. So this is in practice differences with Judaism. Some, like hanging on to the fasting practices and all that, this is sort of a contrast as opposed to the other. So fasting is a hard practice even today for Muslims, because Muslims are the only people that you would find, and then I know some Eastern Orthodox Christians do fast closer to Muslims. We have seen people in Pakistan, for instance, some old Orthodox communities do try to fast. In Creed, you don't have to have a lineage connection with Judaism or with Islam. In Judaism, I'm sure people also know that if my mother is not Jewish, then it's a very long path to be called a Jew.
Right.
It has to have a ancestry link. Islam canceled all that. Islam said no. If you want to be an Abrahamic person, you can be actually Abrahamic and Isaac and Ishmaeli. All you have to do is follow their message. And do hold on to the covenant, like circumcision, for instance. Do circumcise the baby, and do raise them good, the male child, of course, as it says in the Old Testament, and raise them good. That's the basic covenant. But it doesn't have to be linked with just the lineage. If someone wants to practice and live the faith, so be it. Anybody can be Muslim. Anybody can be so that's a major difference between Judaism and Islam, creed-wise. It's sort of a creedal thing. Now, as far as the divinity of God, oneness of God, it's very close. The differences could be where in Old Testament there are these sort of graphical depictions of God, almost like a person, wrestling with, for instance, David or Jacob,
the angel of God appearing.
In a especially God. So those manly or human depictions of God are not allowed in Islam. God is above a canvas. God is above. How sometimes when we go to especially in a Catholic church, there is a picture of a very, very old person, big white beard, very Muslim looking, and he's doing this, right? He's doing this. And then there's the whole humanity coming through his hand. Even though I know it's not literal, the person who drew it did not mean it literal. Or, Michelangelo doing his statue and this and that. Right. Islam forbids all of that. It's actually taking 10 commandments seriously. Let's not draw images of God. God is above and beyond that. Because when I draw an image of God, and I'm sure Protestant world agrees to that because this was part of the Protestant movement, that God, if I draw him on a canvas, I am limiting God. Yes, with a white beard and old age, it shows wisdom, but it does not show the strength and power. So you see, there will always be a give and take. I will lose something. So this is a major, fundamental, key difference, creed and practice-wise, on divinity of God. So we started on the Judaism and Islam from basic practices, day-to-day things, all the way we went up.
Yep. Good.
To the heavens.
That's helpful. Now, maybe you could explain a little bit about, in this series, I'm going to get into Christianity and the different groups that exist within Christianity and explain some of their differences. What are some of those differences in Islam? We hear, say, in the news about Sunni and Shiites.
Oh, yeah.
And what are some
all
of those
time.
things?
Especially when Iraq war started, when that was the first time modern Western world coming in contact with this whole Shia-Sunni business. Right. In Afghanistan, it was not seen that much, as much it was seen in Iraq. And that shows something. Even though Afghanistan has a huge Shia population, but it was not in the news as much. Notice Iraq was more in the news. That actually builds a connection for our answer. That, in Iraq, there was a huge political hostility that was there for at least last 100 years. A rift between, for power struggle. And of course the Iranian or Persian hegemony, before Iran became Iran, or the Persian state, they wanted their hegemony, their power, their dominance on the region. Whereas the rest of the Iraqi and some of these Emirates states, they wanted their dominance. So it was a lot of political wrestling already happening. And even if you go back before the colonial invasions, it was already happening that people were literally, as the king would change, the state religion would change. So it almost became like how Protestant and Catholic world were at odds in Europe, like literally killing each other and all that. Yet, surprisingly, you'd be surprised. So a lot of the politics of dominance was quite resonating, like Europe versus Arab world. However, it was surprising. What was surprising that when people found out in the Western world that, wait a second, so if you look at the Protestant Catholic world, the size of the Bible changes, the number of books. Right. So almost like I could say two Bibles, that one is 66 books, the other is 73 books. However, in Islam, it doesn't happen that, but still the rift is there. Like same Quran, it doesn't have like a Shia version or a Sunni version. It's Quran. Because Quran's preservation was a huge task that Muhammad, in his life, took it very seriously. He wouldn't, for so long, he wouldn't even allow people to write his explanations and teachings so that the Quran doesn't get corrupted, Because imagine if I'm a scribe and I'm writing Quran and I end up writing your words. Like, sure. I see that in the holy texts, many texts, like where the speech of the leader or the prophet is mixed with the speech of God. He said, don't do that. I don't want that to happen. My words will be called my hadith. Don't write it. So he actually forbade for almost a decade from writing this. So Quran was very thoroughly preserved, but still the differences happen. So the root of Shia Sunni, these are the two major schools. And then Sufi, mystics. So I would say in the Islamic world, there are three major schools of thought, or sects if you want to say. However, the third one, which is called mysticism, mystics, which is like I would say sort of monks of Muslims, they can be found in Shia Sunni both. That's why I usually not just me, even the textbook writers that teach Islam in the universities on a secular level don't label mysticism as a separate sect. I would say mysticism could be in anybody, in any place, even in any denomination. So, having said that, primarily it's always Shia Sunni, and it's deeply rooted in the authority part. Like, who has the authority after the Quran? So Quran is the fundamental authority. Teachings of Prophet are an authority, but then who next? Who has the right to interpret the Quran and teachings of Muhammad? Because the problem is, when we deal with these divine texts, the interpretations change. For instance, if I go to Malaysia, some of the laws in Malaysia is a predominantly Muslim country, are not the same as the laws even in Saudi Arabia. Yet both are non-Shia. Then when I go to Iran, the laws in Iran and Iraq are not the same, yet both have a dominant Shia majority. So you see how interpretation can be very tricky. Interpreting the law, even a secular law, like our Constitution, we always debate interpreting the Constitution. For instance, affirmative action, a recent thing, from Johnson's time. It's debated. There is people from both sides, even minorities in favor and against affirmative action. One example. So there will always be people who will be interpreting. This is exactly what happened with the growth of the Islamic world, because right now Islamic world is close to 1.7 billion people, spread through 56, 57 countries. Their cultures, there's so many things. The root cause is interpretation. The Shia community said that we will take the knowledge of Islam only from the lineage of Prophet. Lineage and good faith together, not just lineage. Remember when we talked about Abrahamic roots of Islam, Islam says just the lineage is not important, it's the following. They said followers of a Prophet, but they have to be from his lineage. We will take it then. They are the most trusted because they're the household of the Prophet. We're not talking 1 century later, we're talking about the immediate. Like Ali, the cousin of the Prophet, he was the caliph, he was the leader, his wife is the daughter of the Prophet, and the children, the grandkids were nurtured by the Prophet. At least they were 10 when he passed away, so we're going to trust them only. And a handful of other disciples or students. Whereas, and at that time, it was not called Shia or Sunni. It was just my understanding. Let's say I came to you as a teacher who would say, yes, trust that guy because he was that old man, he was nurtured by the Prophet. Trust him versus others. Whereas you come to me and say, well, yes, but also you can corroborate things from other guys too, because they were students from the classroom, and they're good people. You see? So the spectrum was wider on the other side. Now, today, interestingly enough, in Iraq, in Malaysia, or other countries, especially where there's not monarchy, countries where they don't have monarchy or dictatorship, you ask everyday Muslims, what are you? So Muslim. Okay, what group are you? Are you Shia or Sunni? You say, I don't know what that is. Yeah. On a day-to-day level, people don't care, because it's the same Quran, same Prophet. When they're praying, they're facing northeast, the Kaaba, the house of worship that was built by Abraham and his son Ishmael. They built it. It's a symbol of monotheism. It gives them a direction. So praying in the same direction, using the same Quran, using the same guidance from the Prophet. And actually, interestingly, both parties, they love the family of the Prophet. So you see, this is a very, very minor difference that got overblown in many places. And believe it or not, some places, people have capitalized on that. People, like, let's say if I want to dominate this region, I'll make alliances. Hey, I'm with you, or I'm not with them, political.
Divide people up. Yeah.
It happened a lot. British actually are the mastermind of this. They started this, and it worked. Divide and rule. They did it here. Our lands, Americas, everywhere in the world. The divide and rule has worked, sadly, for politics. So yeah, Shia Sunni is not sort of so much religious, as opposed to it's more political and then cultural. A lot of things are cultural, and one side, because of certain dominance, would give more importance to something versus the other.
Okay. Okay. So I guess thinking theologically then, if, from an Islamic perspective, what is the basic root problem in the world, and what is the solution?
I think I think, people, when they see so much violence and problems in the world, people get more and more disgusted toward religion. Often they blame religion for being responsible for conflicts and all that. There was a recent 2013 and 2014 famous Encyclopedia of War published book. It's available on Amazon. It's surprising that less than 5% of the world wars in our human history known record are of religious nature. So we're saying more than 90% of the warfare in the world has been non-religious. Power, biggest power, dominance, expansion, greed, more wealth, money, resources. I'm not just talking now. I'm not just talking oil.
Right.
It's bigger than that. It's sadly the greedy nature of human. No secular teachings can cure that cancer. It has to have something that is above the human level. Has to have something of a transcendent nature, which is divine. So actually, if every faith goes back to their sources, their fundamental teachings, hopefully, if every faith is good, I'm assuming, every faith has a good essence, at least, in their background. Every faith in the world. If they go back and they connect with something higher than themselves, higher than just people, they will find that, in the core, in the essence, we are all humanity. We're God's family. So why do we have to fight and kill one another and steal from one another? I think a lot of these problems will go away if people got a little closer to their divine creator, the divinity, the spirituality, the spiritual aspect. Unfortunately, we have become more and more materialistic. And materialism, some people thought that, I've studied Karl Marx also. Mm-hmm. Some people thought Marxism is the way to cure the cancer of materialism, not just capitalism, because not every capitalist view is greed-based. Actually, capitalism, if it's looked in its positive sense, is service-based. You serve, you provide, you care of one another. And even the communist, if you look at the manifesto, originally it sounds like, wow, this guy is speaking for the laborer, for the factory worker, for the poor man. He's not supporting Apple factories or Samsung, the two giants right now in the cell phone market. No, he's talking about the people who work there. They have rights, they have a life. But how was this executed? Corpses of millions of people. Yeah. And most of them they said religion is the cancer of the society, strip it away. Okay, then what did you give to the world? You gave the world nothing but blood. Evil way of sharing. Such an evil way of sharing resources that if I have capital, I want to open a factory, I wouldn't. Somebody's going to take all my wealth. So now even they are making adjustments. The other part of the world that is anti-capital. So Islam is offering a pathway that is in the middle of both extremes. In this pursuit of making money and providing, don't get too greedy. And also in the pursuit of caring for the needy and the poor, don't become yourself a usurper from someone who has earned from his hard work. Encourage them to give. Encourage them to share. Encourage the millionaire to give a tax, which is in Islam called zakat. Mm-hmm. If honestly the 2.5% alms giving in Islam is only 2.5% of the wealth. Today there are several studies, and people can look that up. If top 100 richest men, and they're mostly men, the richest men in the world, top 100 people, gave only 1% of their wealth, only 1%, it is enough to eradicate the poverty. It would take away the hunger. In fact, there was one study that if 1%, another estimate was, or 1.5% of the wealth is given to just Africa, it would bring the entire Africa out of poverty. So Islam is already giving a solution, guidance to the world, that pray to God, worship one God, get closer to Him. And when I get closer to Him and I am making money, I realize that I didn't earn money because I am great, because I am a smart man, I'm a smart businessman. No, it's a grace of God. For all my success, when I give the credit to a higher being, I'll say, okay, since it's not mine, then I should go and provide for the needy, care for them. Nobody has to come and take my entire business from me, or half of my wealth that I'm going to give it to the poor. That would discourage me. Instead, if I have a self-realization that, okay, what I have been given is a blessing. That's the same concept at least 3 fundamental communities have it. Judeo-Christian, Islamic, all of them say wealth is a blessing of God. It's or a test. In Islam, actually, it adds something. It could be a test, because if it could become a curse on me if I use that wealth against the creation of God, if I didn't take care of people, because God gave it to me to test me if I'm gonna do good things with it for myself and others, or I'm gonna become a greedier and a usurper, and I start doing exploitation of people. See how I'll be tested? So this wealth can become a curse of God or a blessing of God based on what I do. So once I realize that yes, it's not mine, it's His. And that's why actually in Arabic language, it's beautiful language. I'm a non-Arab. Amazing. When I say something is mine, I'll say E in the end. For instance, telephone. I'll say telephone, my phone. Pen, I'll say this, qalam, qalami. I add an E in the end. Wealth is mal. So I say E in the end, mali, my wealth. And in Arabic language, same word, mali, my wealth, E. If I separate it, it means not mine. Same word that says my wealth, mali, my wealth. I separate the two, and I read it again with a little pause. Mali means not for me. It's His. That concept of trust, if people understand, the world will become a beautiful place. And believe me, a lot of good people are doing this. When there's droughts, when there's famines, when there's catastrophes, who is going there for relief work? People of the faith. You would often find, when Hurricane Katrina came and many other hurricanes in the last 3-4 years happened, you would find 2 people leading always from the front. 2 faithful people, faithful groups. It's Christians and Muslims. Often it's faith. So faithfulness is our way, I think, in a good way. There are people who misinterpret faith everywhere. Where don't we have Jim Jones? Where don't we have people who, like War of Roses? Where don't we have bad people? We have militias right here in America, in Michigan. We have militias, right? I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about those people who are the majority representatives of every faith. Majority representatives of every faith. At least I can speak for Islam and Christianity, that the majority of the people are caring people. They go and help. When refugees came in this country, I'm talking about the Syrian refugees 4 years ago, it was a big effort led by the Abrahamic communities. Faithful people. Majority was faithful people. That gave me a lot of optimism that, there's hope. We can be a better world. Inshallah, God willing. Amen.
What about what's the Islamic understanding of, say, the afterlife and God's judgment? I mean, how does that play out? What's your understanding?
It's the middle of two extremes. There's one worldview, not in the Judeo-Christian Islamic world, but there is a worldview among some people that you would be reborn into bad shapes of cycles if you do evil. There is no repentance. And there can be another worldview where there's no such thing. There are some worldviews where no matter what a person does, no problem. It's like heaven is reserved.
Mm-hmm.
Islam doesn't have that. In fact, Islam does not guarantee, promise paradise to people just because I'm a Muslim. Islam requires practice. So in the hereafter, I could have that. By the way, hereafter is the real life. This life is short. No matter how long I live, I'm even 100. One day I will be dying. One day death is coming. It's inevitable truth, bitter truth that people don't want to admit, but this is what this life is. So there must be a place, because today in this world, a lot of good people die unnoticed, unheard, unappreciated. A lot of bad people die with no justice, without getting caught, untouched. We just talked about millions of people getting killed just because of few powerful people. Just last big World War II or Syrian war. Very recent. We have a humanitarian crisis and we still can't decide who is the real culprit. Who caused so many people become homeless and die? Who is it? Is it the freedom fighters that often we helped and funded? Or is it their government? Or is it all these powerful nations, the G8?
Mm-hmm.
Who is responsible? We still don't know that. There has to be a world of ultimate justice. Otherwise, there's no God. When an atheist approaches me about all these injustices of the world, I said, yes, you're right. That is why we have hereafter, which is ever after. It has to be. Otherwise, there is no God. I cannot even justify the divine justice of God unless there is a hereafter. And that life is, there can't be any other answer but this. Even the good people go unnoticed often. Nobody appreciated them enough. Who's going to reward? There has to be a place, a courtroom where people will go and the judge will say, see, this man nobody knew? Here is the reward for this guy and he will live for eternal bliss there. Here is this guy, he killed, but he killed by accident. Or he punched somebody in the face. He didn't mean to punch him that bad, but he ended up taking his eye out. So he goes to jail for a week. Nobody caught him. I'm going to give him ultimate justice. He goes to jail for a week. That's temporary hell.
Okay.
And here comes a guy who murdered like Hitler. Suppose, as the world told us, I was not there when Hitler was around. Bad guy. God says, you Hitler, not just you have that advisor with you, that you go to hell for eternity and you go into the midst of the lowest and the lowest of the hell. Right? Nobody caught them. So there has to be that courtroom. Just like here, we expect a courtroom to avoid total anarchy. But not everybody makes it to that courtroom. But there is a courtroom where people will be held accountable. That is the essence of Islamic hereafter, where eternal bliss, temporary curse, punishment, like a prison, or ever after hell, like all the time, no death. Islamic concept of hereafter is no death. In fact, eschatology is a very big subject of hereafter in Islam. Signs of the Day of Judgment. It's coming close. The world is going to come to an end. Prophet Muhammad has mentioned hundreds of signs of hereafter. Skyscrapers. He predicted those in 7th century Arabia. Now, somebody could say, well, it's a very general prediction. He said Arabs would compete. Not just mention skyscrapers. He said Arabs would compete. Whose tower is the biggest? Emirates versus Saudi.
Right.
So he said, I and the Day of Judgment is like this. Be ready for this. It's coming. And he also mentioned the return of Jesus Christ. This is all hereafter philosophy of Islam. So in Quran, the signs of the Day of Judgment, my last moments of death, just after death, then purgatory. This is all purgatory, but just after death, and then after death, and then resurrection for the final day, the court date, and then paradise and hell. This is literally 1/3 of the Quran. 1/3 of the Quran, of like 500-600 pages. And easiest reference, people can read Quran. You're free to quote Quran. Nobody has the exclusive copyrights on Quran. Quran.com.
Okay.
Quran.com is a very good source to take hereafter knowledge from the Quran. Very first chapter of the Quran, that is praising of God, speaking to God, mix of both. The intermission of that small chapter is master of that day, the day of religion, the day of faith, the day of judgment. So this is the biggest source to go to, where all hereafter questions are answered. A lot of hereafter. And then of course Hadith. Hadith supplements that, the sayings, the teachings. Because they asked him, they said, what about the grave? So Quran mentions general descriptions of this part, going to the graves, or that moment before the actual commencement. He says, yes, grave could be either a ditch of hell or a garden of paradise. He said, really? He said, yes. The grave will expand. See, this is all unseen knowledge. So I had to have a divine source. So he would explain. He says, Gabriel came and showed me things. He says, actually, something very powerful. He says, I almost asked God to let you hear the voices of the dead, just for the time when you're taking them to their burial, or whatever people do, like cremation and stuff. We have to do burial, unless there is a disease or something. Sure. But for the most part, it's ground burial, which is the traditional thing between the three communities. He says, I was tempted, and I almost asked God to enable our frequencies to hear the voices of the dead. Like we can't hear the conversation of the plants because we operate on different frequencies. Similarly, the dead have a different frequency. He said, but then I said, oh no, if I did do that, you would run away from burying your dead. So this was a clear hadith in giving a message to people that the real life has just begun after I close my physical eyes. The soul, that's the real life. Very, very big subject of the Quran, Islamic studies. Yeah.
Okay. And then, you touched upon Jesus there. What is the Islamic view of Jesus?
Beautiful, very good. In fact, this is also a major difference between Judaism and Islam. Remember, there was a question earlier that the difference between Jewish and Muslim communities. Right. Jesus Christ is also a difference. So in the Jewish communities, Jesus is not seen as a prophet. There's only Messianic Jews, I think. They're called Jews for Jesus. Right. They are the only sect, and this is a sort of a modern sect. The mainstream Judaism does not have Jesus as a prophet or a Messiah or a Christ or anything. Whereas mainstream Christianity, most of the Christianity recognizes Jesus as an incarnation of God. However, Islam has a very unique view on Jesus Christ. See, I'm mentioning the name Christ. One of them is that Jesus is born through a virgin birth. No question about that. Two, Jesus Christ not only him, his mother, Mary, peace be upon her, is one of the most honorable women ever existed in creation. 2. And she and Jesus Christ are mentioned more than her alone. So Mary is mentioned 19 times in the Bible. Jesus Christ is mentioned more than 34, 35. Mary is actually mentioned more than 34, 35 times in the Quran.
Oh, okay.
Highly honored, revered. And Jesus Christ is the same way. More mentioned by name than Muhammad. So, but, now coming to the miracles. All the miracles of Jesus Christ are accepted, and in fact, if anyone denies those miracles, is not considered a Muslim. That's a key difference between Islam and Judaism also. That if a Muslim denies miracles of Jesus Christ, all his miracles, including his ascension toward heavens, often, for the most part of the Muslim world, they would not recognize him as a Muslim. No matter how much he says, I pray, fast, and one God. No, not a Muslim. Because it's a fundamental message in the Quran. Because Quran came at a time when Jesus, the nature of Jesus Christ, Ecumenical Council 1, Council 2, Council 3, it was being debated. The 4th council happened 451. Muhammad is born 571. The Orthodox world, the age of martyrs had been seen. The Romans persecuted Christians. So Quran came at a very special time where if God did not address Jesus, this means that either God does not know Jesus, or it's a different God, or this is not God. Something is going on. So it became a subject matter of the Quran. It was a subject matter of the Quran that Jesus Christ, he was given honor. In fact, people who criticized Jesus, Quran condemned them. Quran said, don't say that you killed Jesus. Don't say that you humiliated Jesus. God saved him from all the humiliation. And here is the difference. Quran, at the same time, so honoring and uplifting his status, including mother's status, like she is the chosen one of all the women of mankind and jinn kind and humankind in the creation ever, but he's not divine. The divinity is the key. That the God of 10 commandments is speaking again, that God is one. It does not have a need of a son to save the humanity. That's the philosophy in Islam. That's the key difference. Everything else is almost the same. In fact, you'll be surprised. Speaking of similarities, our world is so divided, people talk about differences, but I'll tell you something in similarities of honor of Jesus Christ. Chapter 19 of the Quran is called Mary. So there's a dedicated chapter in the Quran with the name of Mary. It's hard to find in any holy book a chapter named after a woman. So in the chapter of Mary, very beginning, first 2-3 pages, a miracle of Jesus Christ is mentioned, that actually I have the honor of going all the way as far as Constantine, Michigan, in a church, reading that portion where Jesus Christ spoke just after birth, when she brought him, and the Jewish community, the rabbis started cursing her, said, oh, you brought a child from illegitimate relationship, it's out of wedlock, blah, 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 very bad things. She pointed at the baby. So what do you mean you pointed? Because God told her to make a vow of silence. So she pointed at the baby, and the baby, Jesus spoke that my mother is innocent. I'm sent by God. God gave me a book. Speaking of gospel. This is in the Quran. This miracle is not mentioned ever anywhere before in any holy scripture. This is a very unique miracle of Jesus Christ that actually takes the number of miracles of Jesus Christ even more in the Quran. Now, one may ask, like, okay, why Muslims honor Jesus so much and yet they don't believe him as divine? Why is that? The answer is because same Quran told us not to. Same Quran told even Muhammad not to. Okay. See, Quran is a very authoritative book, especially when it comes to creed. Practices, we have weaknesses, we may not follow everything, but as far as the creed is concerned, the belief, Quran says this is what you should believe in. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Yes, sir. Aye. Amen. Quran says this is what you know, Muslims of Muhammad's time were Arabs of Arabia, you know. They had every reason to deny a Hebrew man. They were told, no, you gotta go above your biases. He is to be honored. Okay. In fact, they didn't do that, they wouldn't become Muslim. So this is, you know, there are books actually written, Jesus in Islam. There's a scholar called Joshua Evans. He wrote a book called, I think, Love of Jesus or something in Islam, something like that. His name is Joshua Evans. It's a good book. It's been translated also in other languages. I've seen a copy of that in our office. Someone gave it to me. I haven't read it yet. Looks like a good book from the title.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, those were the questions I had. I mean, I really appreciate.
No, thank you for dedicating time and coming with all the recording and everything. You know, I hope your people appreciate what you do. This is it takes a lot of effort. Believe me, it's not easy to do my setup here. You know, the stuff I was doing. It's a lot of work. Thank you. That's very nice. Actually, got recorded. You know, it's even better than the NPR interview. They did an audio. This
more
is
theology,
video.
Right?
Yeah, and this is video, and it's more sort of it's more relaxed. You know, sort of not so what do you call that? Not so formal.
Right.
It's not that formal. It's thank you. It was very light and friendly conversation. Thank you. Appreciate it.